Koton Dewananade ho Aric Chopito let shina ho Shiwinan iskon hom ed Ashashida is Adeaya. Thank you for welcoming me. I'm Aric Chopito. I am from the pueblo of Zuni. Zuni is about 3 hours from Flagstaff along the Zuni River basin. We have lived there for time immemorial. We had emerged from this place of Kulhinan Akwin out in the Grand Canyons, and I migrated to Zuni, spinning, weaving, and basic weaving techniques prior to the introduction of the loom. About 1200 AD required basically just finger techniques. And so basically constantly twining yucca fibers together. Most of the materials that were used pre-introduction of cotton, pre-introduction of wool was blast fibers, bark from different types of trees, willows. Those basically were the primary materials that were used during the time that our people occupied Chaco Canyon, different areas within the Grand Canyon and within the lower southwest area of Arizona and New Mexico, referred to the Mogollon Rim. At that time, they were creating textiles out of yucca fibers. Basically, you take the blade, boil it, separate the pulp from the fibers, and with that you could easily twist in the process of twining to create these cordages. And these would be those cordages that you would actually use to create any type of textiles. And so this is a 2-ply. Most of the fibers required at least 4 strands of yucca that were all twined together to create this type of cordage. Now with that base of the cordage, you can twist rabbit fur. In this particular sample is referred to as a twining technique. And then this particular one incorporates turkey feathers. You can see the base, the shaft of the feather right here, and then the furs. And this particular process, instead of twining, they basically wrapped around several different fibers. And then this particular one here incorporated twining when it comes to wrapping the turkey feathers to the cordages. And so those different processes you utilize creates either a thick cordage or a thinner cordage, depending on how you wanted to utilize the blanket. They would create reed mats. This one is created out of yucca. This is a twilled plated mat that would have been laid down onto the floor, where they would actually put a rabbit blanket on top of it, and then they would cover themselves with a turkey feather blanket. And these techniques basically are hard to find in any museum collection, mainly because most of them are organic and they degrade in time. And so with elements and nature itself, we're very fortunate to have even samples of these archaeological findings that they did produce. And so with these samples, we've been able to deduce how any one particular textile was created. And so we can do replicas of these textiles. But the rabbit fur blanket in Zuni, its extinction would be around the turn of the century, the 19th century. Up at that point, they were produced readily. And the decline basically went totally, it became obsolete at that particular point. I was able to go to the National Museum in Washington, where I saw firsthand one of the blankets that was collected from Zuni when the Frederick Hodge expedition had done their excavation in the villages of Hawiku, Quechipawa, and the village of the Great Kivas, and they had acquired a rabbit blanket there. And so I was able to examine that particular piece when I went into the National Museum's collection, and I was able to figure out how the process of making a rabbit blanket was. The one in the National Museum was actually braided versus twined. And so you can tell the difference between the different techniques. Okay, both of these samples we have here, these are braided. So we didn't learn the twining process till we got to this stage. Till we got to the turkey feather blanket.
Both of the rabbit fur blankets from you are both braided.
Yeah, they're both braided. So
I believe we got this one from you in 2017, and your son in 2018.
2018. This particular rabbit blanket is a combination of 213 furs, I believe, that we use to make this particular one. And the thing that we found out is that when you braid it, you use a lot more pelts. Okay. But when you twine it, you actually extend the utilization of the hide itself, because when you're braiding, you're basically braiding 3 at a time versus just twining 1 at a time. And so you get to extend the width and the length of the blanket itself by twining. And so it's been a really unique experience to try and experiment with the different techniques. And, you have to go back and think of how dedicated they were to their craft and how they were able to develop these techniques without any outside influence, European influence. But most of the weaving techniques that are utilized within the Southwest are native to this land. And this particular one, you basically don't need a frame, but a frame allows us to create better edges. Zuni was very well known for using milkweed as one of their main weaving materials. And so that milkweed, it had to be collected around this time. This time would be the proper time to be collecting milkweed. And I'm not too sure if you're familiar with that plant, but you drive down the road, you can see it just growing abundantly. And the thing that most people don't understand is that when we come up into this time right now, weaving is an individual craft. But before, before the homes separated and before the kids moved out of the home, when it used to be under one roof, families would get together and clans would get together, and they would actually produce textiles together as a communal project versus individuals. But this particular turkey feather blanket, believe it or not, took about 14 turkeys, and we could only produce just a minimal size. So you can just imagine how much more feathers that were needed to create the blanket itself. But one would lay on the rabbit fur blanket, and then they would cover themselves with the turkey feather blanket. And so the turkey feathers, like most feathers, are repellent against water. And so typically you'd have a waterproof blanket that you could sleep under the stars with. And so you'd be tucked in between fur and feather. And so the downside to weaving textiles is it takes a long time. There's a lot of prep, there's a lot of setup, and the weaving portion of it takes vast amount of time. And in the times when they did agriculture, you could sustain yourself on this type of livelihood. But in this modern era, when our necessities go to lights and technology, sustaining yourself financially weaving a textile is not profitable. There was a study out of the University of New Mexico that did a 3x4 Navajo blanket from sheep to blanket. Basically, it took roughly about 1,000 hours from trading post to blanket. It took about 800 hours. And so the cost differential from when the point that they completed the piece to when they sold it at that market price from sheep to wool was only 10 cents an hour. And then from trading post to wool was only 12 cents an hour. And so with those dynamics is the reason why the decline of textiles happens in most pueblo societies, because once they get a taste of how long it takes and how much money they're going to make in the end after they initially invest the material, it's really not profitable. And so most people who do weave to this day, they do it for the love of the art.
Can you talk a little bit about the work that you've done the research you've done in museums and how you use that to kind of, I guess, teach yourself to these techniques?
Well, the School of Advanced Research in Santa Fe, they produced a publication that focused on pueblo textiles, and it has diagrams of how to make a brocade. It has the outline of how to do a floated warp technique and a double floated warp technique. It also has the elements on how to create a brocade sash. But if you don't know what you're reading and you can't comprehend, you know, how those elements come together with the instructions, you're really lost. And so the book didn't make any sense to me until I actually went into a collections and I seen the actual piece itself. And so about 1970s, about the time that Gallup-McKinley County gave the school district over to Zuni, and Zuni created their own Zuni public school district, they incorporated Zuni language class into their curriculum, and they taught Zuni language in both the elementary, middle school, and high school. And along with that addition, they created a program so that they could teach textiles. And so very few people at that time knew how to produce textiles. And so from that point, Zuni has produced abundance of textile weavers. Every year they graduate at least 12. Out of those 12, you'll get 3 that know how to expedite any type of textile without no problem. Out of those, you'll get 1 that will excel to the double techniques. And then you'll find 1 out of every 3 batches that will go to the lengths to create kilts, brocade sashes. But the thing about it is once they dive into the amount of time it takes, a lot of them will not. They'll basically drop the art itself, retain the knowledge, and that's the problem that we've been dealing with. The nice thing about textiles is that they never made anything perfect. And so there was a bunch of flaws in all of the older techniques, all the older textiles, in the older textiles, and their mistakes allowed me to see actually how they were produced together. And so with the NMA, the National Museum's rabbit fur blanket, they wove until they got to a certain point and they ran out of wool. And so instead of using wool, they used broadcloth, and it widened so wide here. And I was able to see how they braided it together. And so, you know, their misfortune of having the proper materials was my fortune in figuring out how this was produced.
So that allowed you to figure it out without actually having to take it apart.
Yes. And if you're interested, if you go onto the the Maxwell Museum's YouTube page, they actually show you how to make these cordages, and they show you how to twine. We braided this particular piece, and they actually created 2 of them. This one belongs here, and then the other one belongs to a traveling museum, which we have a sample of a rabbit fur blanket and a turkey feather blanket in that traveling exhibit that was created for the Wheelwright Museum. This is referred to as a rain sash. In Zuni, they refer to it as a molibopikwine, but the thing about the Zuni language is it's very descriptive. And so most of the words that we incorporate to items describe the belt itself. And so the rings that wrap is how it translates to. And so the woven portion of this particular sash is referred to as a cloud in the summertime or a blanket of snow in the wintertime. But the rings here, fastened typically of corn husk, are symbolic of clouds. And then the fringes would actually be the rain falling to the ground. And so typically it's worn on the side or to the back. But the swaying of the fringe is supposed to simulate rain falling to the ground. And the wearer's job is to basically have these bottom tassels touch the ground. And so symbolically, the touching of the fringes to the ground is to beckon the rain to come. And so once any particular sash is woven, the fringes and the braids are done. We typically take it out in the morning and we pray so that, you know, many blessings will come to the wearer of that particular garment. And so, as they're out dancing and or doing whatever ceremony that they were addressed to do, those blessings would go out into the community, go out to the wearer. And since we live in such an arid climate, most of our ceremonies are asking for rain, snow, whatever season that they're performing the ceremony in hopes to, bring an end to this drought. And so typically, and that's why we dance a lot. And that's why we always constantly, in our prayers, we always ask for rain. We always ask for strength to the seeds, the animals that live wild in nature that provide subsistence to us. And the things that grow in nature are abundant so that the animals can eat them also. And so it's always a constant cycle of our prayers that we're constantly saying. And any particular garment that we have, to the rain sash, to the kilt, to the brocade, those all have basic elements of nature. The kilt itself is referred to as a cloud, and rain, these are rain droplets also. And in the wintertime, they're interpretive of deer hooves in the snow. And typically these are clouds facing down to the earth itself. And always whenever they use green refers to vegetation, white refers to the rain clouds, and black refers to the thunder clouds. And so lifelines of the textiles in here. And then these are rolling clouds as you see them coming into the valley. And so typically there's a tassel down on the bottom here, which would be symbolic of a rain cloud. And we do a lot of tasseling on a lot of our textiles. And typically that would symbolize the beckoning of rain to come. This particular one here is done out of commercial cloth. With the introduction of cotton into the Southwest, became the decline and less usage of plant fibers, yucca, barks, and willows, and they moved into the cotton area. And then with the introduction of trading posts onto the reservations, then the commercial cloth came in. And so that became the decline of the production of a lot of cotton. And then with the introduction of wool, that added another element to the decline of a lot more natural fibers within the Southwest that were native to the Southwest that were being utilized at that time. In Hopi, they prefer to use the hand woven. But if you go up from Zuni towards the northern Rio Grande Pueblos, they prefer the commercial because it's a lot more readily available, and a lot of people don't know how to produce the fabric itself. But it's a long process to actually weave any single garment because there's no they've got true salvages all the way around, and so this is woven in a plain weave, and then the embroidery is appliqued on after. And so the cloth itself could take up to a day, two, depending on your artistry, your ability to have mastered the craft. And after that, then the embroidery is appliqued on after. And so I tried to figure out a technique that I could use, possibly using the brocade to actually weave the design in without having to embroider it. And so try to eliminate the embroidery process, but it would take a lot of calculating numbers. Yeah, but the brocade here is not a true brocade. It's actually a semi-brocade. Whereas there's a true brocade would have a design on both front and back, but since it's only got the design on the front part, it's a semi-brocade. But this particular piece, you actually weave front, 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 and then when you get to this portion, this stumped me for about a week. I could not figure out how that was done, but this particular portion, you weave from the back to the front. So you kind of go reverse, and then once you get back here, then you can go from front to back in the twining of the wool fibers. So this one is done in wool, but most of the brocades today are all using commercial cotton and commercial yarns. Yeah, a lot of acrylics now, but very few go back to the traditional, the new traditional wool.
Right.
But if you look at the difference in colorization, you've got commercial here. This is all commercial acrylic. And then this is wool.
Okay.
And so the differentiation in the shades of color is really different.
Okay.
And so with the acrylics, you get bright colors. And with the wool, it's kind of a little dull. More muted in that sense. So,
can you talk a little bit about how to differentiate like a brocaded piece from an embroidered piece? Like for your casual, somebody who's just casually, collecting textiles, how can you tell looking at a piece whether it's been embroidered or been brocaded?
Yeah, typically that would be on the back portion of it. And so you'll notice that this was actually produced with a true pueblo stitch. And so each regions have their own different style of embroidery. But if you go on to the School of American Research's Indian Arts Center, they actually break down the different pueblo stitches that they have on their website.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I'm not too sure if you're aware of that, but yeah, but you can go on there and it shows you the different embroidery techniques to the kilts, to the mantas, the blue indigo mantas. I don't know if you have any here.
Sure, we do.
Yeah, that basically the back is how you can really differentiate from a brocade. And so you'll notice the differences, straight lines where you have differences in where they did the stitch here.
Really irregular.
Yeah. And so if you looked at them side by side, this would have to be parallel because of the design. But, there's no set structure in the way you do this. Some people have perfected it to where they can actually put a design on here too, which would lead you to believe that it's actually a brocade, or a brocade, but it would be done using the embroidery technique. Yeah. So they can fool you too. So. But it's a matter of, it's just a matter of actually flipping it over and actually checking it out. And so I lined this up along the table side for a one particular reason. But when the Navajo artists went into the trading post, the only way that they determined whether or not the textile was purchasable is if it lined up even with the edge of the table. Now, if it wavered from the edge of the table, then it was ixnayed and it was not purchased. But if it was flat and straight, and also they took the measurement, make sure that it was 26 inches per inch, or 26 threads per inch, then they were able to buy it.
Okay.
And so that's how the trading post determined whether or not they were going to purchase it or not. Right. So if you had a windy road on the edge of the table, you were not a master weaver, yes. You were not feeding your people that day.
And while we're waiting for Tony, Aric, can you explain the significance of the San Francisco Peak? Someone was actually mentioning that earlier.
Yeah, behind us, if you pan over, in Zuni, they refer to that as Sunha Kwinkapa Chuyala. And so Zuni lands were designated by both the San Francisco Peak and the Mount Taylor Peak up in Grants. And so they refer to that one as Sunha Kwinkapa Chuyala and Dewan Kwinkapa Chuyala. But in this particular area, they say medicine societies originated in this area where they have found plant fibers and edible plants that they had properties to heal. And so the origin of our Ash fraternity, the Clown fraternity, the Rain Tree Society, those societies were formed within this area. And so they have their origins here. And so they would come out here, pay homage to the lands that they have out here. And this particular one is wool. It is a plaid blanket. I believe it's done in a plain weave, but with the setup, you're basically setting up all of your fibers in their certain sections. So you set up the brown, the brown tan, all the way across. And as you went back and forth, you would switch your fibers to create these dark solid colors. And so that's how they start to differentiate between each one. And this right here would be your center point. And so it's woven from this to the bottom to the top.
And this piece is from Hopi. Does Zuni pueblo have a similar?
No, we don't. No, we don't. Yeah. Most of the blankets were basically just wrap blankets for the winter time. But Hopi's interpretation of this particular blanket is it's given to the boy, I believe. And he utilizes this upon his passing to get to his place where he would call his heavens, I believe is how they use this particular blanket. And so he, similar to Aladdin, he rides on this to get to the heavens, I believe. But these reeds you can harvest along the river's edge. They have the flowers on top. And as you dry them, you could get, these ones in Zuni, they use these reeds they hollow them out and they use them as offerings. But these particular ones are not hollowed out. Yeah, so I looked underneath. And they are solid in. So that helps me in producing one of these because I do have an itching to create one of these reed mats. So these reed mats would be placed down on the ground and then the rabbit blanket would be placed on top. And then this would basically be your foundation for your rabbit fur mattress. And then you can cover yourself with the turkey feather blanket. Right. Yeah, and so... And all you do is just roll this up and move on to your next destination is basically what the purpose of this whole... right now, we're actually got a grant, myself and my two boys, to create a full-size turkey feather blanket. Oh, wow. And so we have a projected goal of trying to finish it by October. Yeah. We can't wait to see that. Yeah, and so I will take it on tour for a bit before I consider somebody purchasing it. Or we might just hoard it for ourselves. But it's a lot of work. Taking the feathers apart, some we keep intact, depending on which ones we're using, just to create that cordage. And so a lot of countless hours is basically the theme behind textiles. But, it's the most underappreciated art in the art world. I come from a long line of jewelers, and so you can mass produce jewelry and sell them without ease. Same with pottery. You can produce a pottery piece, and with pottery, you can define any price you want. People will purchase it. But with textiles, the battle that we've been facing is people still in that 70s price range. Where they came onto the reservation, they sold them for $30. Yeah. Slowly it increased to 40 and it stuck at 40 up until the 80s. Yeah. And we haven't niched from that 40s mentality for the longest time. And so we slowly increased the price as the years gone on in my 27 years of doing this. And so we've gotten to a price range where we're comfortable and where we're okay with that, but we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah. Any last parting words before we sign off?
Well, we always say that our ancestors come and visit us with the rain. And since we brought these back out, they always want to come and pay homage to the pieces that are in these collections. And I just find it a blessing. And so please do come out to the show, support the Native artists who have been suffering as a result of this pandemic. And this would be our very first show in 2 years that we've done. And we're just very grateful that, we've survived this long. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of people in Zuni due to the pandemic. And I know a lot of Native people have lost a lot of people. And so our hearts go to their families. And we always pray that, with the ability and the strength, we'll carry on this tradition of our Native people. And so thank you very much. Elaka.
Thanks again.